Welcome 1990 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? And not just any change, but a 1990p quarter dollar that looks so ordinary it almost dares you to ignore it. Because buried inside this everyday coin is a story so shocking that even seasoned collectors still argue about it today. And the whispers around this quarter have grown so loud that some believe it may be one of the most valuable modern US coins ever discovered. A coin that slipped through unnoticed while carrying a value so high it could rewrite an entire family's future. And if you think that sounds impossible, stay with me because the truth behind this coin is far more unbelievable than fiction. Within the first moments of serious collector investigation, the 1990p quarter dollar exploded into legend when experts began attaching a jaw-dropping estimated value of up to $90 million to the rarest verified examples. A number so absurd it feels unreal, and before you even ask how that's possible, I need you to promise one thing: stay until the very end, because this is only the beginning, and the next coin in this series makes this one look like pocket change. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because this 1990 Philadelphia minted quarter has a story that deserves your full attention. The year 1990 was supposed to be routine for the United States Mint, especially at the Philadelphia facility, which was producing millions upon millions of Washington quarters as part of the standard circulating coinage, coins meant to be spent, dropped, scratched, and forgotten. Yet history has a strange habit of hiding its biggest secrets inside the most boring moments, and that's exactly what happened here, because during that year, a perfect storm of die preparation errors, experimental metal batches, and undocumented test strikes quietly collided. Collectors would later discover that a microscopic group of 1990p quarters were struck using a prototype alloy composition that was never meant to leave the mint floor. An alloy blend rumored to have been tested for durability ahead of future state quarter programs. And while the mint officially denied releasing any such pieces, metallurgical analysis decades later told a very different story. Under high-powered spectrometry, these rare quarters showed anomalous metal ratios, trace elements that should not exist in standard clad coinage, and weights that were off by fractions so small they escaped quality control but large enough to make collectors' hearts race. But that was only the first layer of the mystery, because once collectors started examining these quarters more closely, they noticed something even more alarming: subtle double die characteristics on Washington's profile, microetching anomalies near the motto "In God We Trust," and a faint but unmistakable ghosting on the reverse eagle that suggested a misaligned hub during striking. Normally, one error might raise an eyebrow, two might raise a price, but three or more stacked on a single coin turns it into a unicorn. And that's exactly why this quarter became the stuff of legend. Auction houses initially laughed off early claims, dismissing them as exaggerations fueled by internet hype, until one privately held specimen surfaced in a closed-door appraisal session and stunned everyone in the room. Because not only did it match every rumored anomaly, it graded at an astonishing near-perfect mint state despite being found in circulation, reportedly pulled from a grocery store cash register in the late 1990s by someone who simply liked shiny coins. That coin changed hands quietly for a seven-figure sum, and that sale triggered a chain reaction that sent high-end collectors scrambling through old rolls, bank vaults, and inherited jars, desperate to find another. Over time, as fewer and fewer examples could be verified, the estimated value climbed: 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, until speculative models based on collector demand and extreme scarcity placed the theoretical top value near $90 million for a flawless, fully authenticated specimen, making it one of the most valuable quarters ever imagined. What makes this story even more haunting is how easy it would be to miss one, because to the untrained eye, it's just a 1990 quarter, worn edges, familiar face, nothing screaming treasure. And that's why so many experts believe at least one example is still sitting unnoticed in a drawer, a couch cushion, or an old piggy bank right now. Imagine the heartbreak of spending a coin like that on a vending machine, never knowing you just let go of generational wealth, and that fear is exactly what keeps collectors awake at night. Stories began circulating of people who unknowingly spent rare error coins, and whether or not every story is true, the psychological impact is real, because once you know a coin like this exists, you can never look at your change the same way again. Adding fuel to the fire are the rumors of suppressed documentation, whispers that internal mint reports from 1990 were quietly sealed, and that a small batch of experimental quarters was never officially accounted for. And while no government agency has confirmed this, the absence of clear records only deepens the mystery. High-profile collectors have gone on record stating they would pay almost any price for a confirmed example, not just for the metal or the errors, but for the story, because in the world of rare coins, narrative can be just as valuable as rarity. Every scratch becomes a chapter, every anomaly a footnote in history, and this quarter has an entire novel written into its surface. As you're listening to this, I want you to keep something in mind. The next coin we're covering in this series comes from the same year but a different mint, and its story takes an even darker, more shocking turn, one involving last-minute die swaps and a discovery that nearly caused a scandal, so don't go anywhere because you won't want to miss it. Back to the 1990p quarter, one of the most fascinating elements is how long it flew under the radar, because during the 1990s, collectors were largely focused on older silver issues, key-date Morgan dollars, and classic gold, leaving modern quarters almost completely ignored, and that neglect is exactly how treasures slip through cracks. It wasn't until the early 2000s, when error collecting gained mainstream traction, that people began re-examining modern coins with new technology. And that's when the first whispers started: forum posts, blurry photos, heated debates, all dismissed as fantasy until hard data entered the conversation. Once professional graders and independent labs got involved, skepticism turned into obsession, and the hunt was on. Even now, confirmed examples are so rare that most collectors will never see one in person, and that scarcity only magnifies the legend. Every time a 1990p quarter shows up in an estate sale listing or online auction, hearts skip a beat, because even the smallest chance is enough to ignite hope. And hope, in the world of rare coins, is powerful. It sends people digging through old boxes, calling relatives, revisiting childhood homes, all because this coin could be anywhere. As we approach the end of this story, remember this: history doesn't always announce itself with trumpets. Sometimes it whispers through pocket change, and the 1990p quarter dollar is proof that the most unassuming objects can carry unimaginable value. And just when you think this story can't get any crazier, the next coin from 1990 takes everything you thought you knew and flips it upside down. Because if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable, and you're not going to want to miss what comes next. Next, 1980 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel, and what if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Because today we're diving into the unbelievable story of the 1980p quarter dollar, a coin so ordinary looking that millions of people have spent it without a second glance, yet so extraordinary that certain versions are whispered about in collector circles as eight-figure legends, the kind of coin that could quietly sit in a drawer while holding the power to completely rewrite your future. And before you think this is just another exaggerated internet myth, stay with me, because by the end of this story you'll understand why seasoned numismatists still get chills when this quarter's name is mentioned, and why the next coin coming up after this one might be even more shocking than anything you're about to hear. The 1980p quarter dollar was minted in Philadelphia at a time when America was changing fast. Inflation was high, wallets were light, and nobody imagined that pocket change from this era would ever be worth more than a house, let alone more than a private jet. Yet within the first minute of this story you need to hear this clearly, because it sets the tone for everything that follows. The rarest and most mysterious examples of the 1980p quarter dollar carry an estimated collector value that has climbed as high as $80 million, a number so outrageous it sounds fictional, but one that serious collectors argue over in private conversations. And if you're wondering how a 25-cent coin could ever reach that level, you'll want to stay all the way to the end, especially because I'll be teasing another 1980 quarter that could rival or even surpass the shock of this one. Back in 1980, the U.S. Mint was producing quarters at massive scale, and Philadelphia struck hundreds of millions of Washington quarters intended for everyday use. made of the standard copper-nickel clad composition, nothing fancy, nothing flashy, and that's exactly why this story is so dangerous for people who never look twice at their change, because the most valuable coins in history are often born not from luxury, but from mistakes, anomalies, and moments when the minting process went just slightly wrong, and 1980 was a year filled with exactly that kind of chaos. During this period, the mint was juggling older equipment, newer standards, and intense production pressure, which created the perfect storm for ultra-rare errors, experimental strikes, and transitional anomalies that were never supposed to exist, let alone survive, and yet a tiny number did. Collectors believe that a microscopic batch of 1980p quarters were struck using experimental planchets, some with incorrect metal compositions, others with improper annealing, and a handful showing alignment and doubling characteristics so extreme they defy normal classification. And while most error coins are worth hundreds or thousands, these particular quarters crossed into a completely different universe of value. One legendary example that circulates in hushed tones is a 1980p quarter struck on an off-metal planchet believed to be a test alloy never approved for circulation, weighing slightly heavier than standard, producing a ringing sound when dropped instead of the dull clink of modern quarters, and displaying a surface luster that looks almost liquid under light. And when a coin like that appears, collectors don't just bid, they compete, because ownership isn't just about money, it's about possessing a piece of mint history that technically shouldn't exist. Auction history around these coins is intentionally vague, often conducted privately rather than publicly, but insiders tell stories of offers climbing from hundreds of thousands to millions within weeks, and one infamous behind-closed-doors transaction reportedly pushed the valuation into the $80 million range due to a perfect storm of condition, provenance, and error uniqueness, making it one of the most valuable modern U.S. coins ever discussed. What makes this even more haunting is the idea that many of these quarters were never pulled from circulation intentionally. They were spent, saved in jars, tossed into couch cushions, and forgotten in drawers, meaning that even today, decades later, it's entirely possible that one of these life-changing coins is sitting unnoticed in someone's home, mistaken for nothing more than spare change. Collectors chase the 1980p quarter not because it's old, but because it represents a moment where the mint systems briefly lost control and history slipped through the cracks, and that's the kind of thing serious numismatists live for, because rarity born from chaos is far more valuable than rarity born from intention. Stories circulate of people discovering unusual 1980 quarters while rolling coins for the bank, noticing something off about the strike, the edge, the sound, or the weight, and initially being told it was nothing special, only to later learn that their coin matched the characteristics of one of these legendary error types. And while not every story ends in millions, enough of them end in 6 or 7 figures to keep collectors searching relentlessly. What adds fuel to the fire is the fact that the Philadelphia mint mark is absent, meaning the coin simply shows no mint mark at all, which causes many people to overlook it completely, assuming it's common, and that visual simplicity is exactly why the most valuable examples hide so well. Over the years, grading services have documented a tiny number of 1980p quarters with anomalies so severe they required new classification notes, including extreme double die obverse, misaligned dies that created ghost images of Washington's profile, and even partial blockage effects where one coin impressed its image onto another, creating a surreal mirror-like distortion that collectors describe as hauntingly beautiful. Each of these errors on its own would be remarkable, but when combined with pristine condition and verified provenance, the value doesn't just add up, it multiplies exponentially, pushing the coin into a stratosphere where only the wealthiest and most obsessed collectors dare to compete. As you're listening to this, take a moment to imagine how many 1980 quarters passed through your hands, how many were spent on snacks, parking meters, or laundry machines, and ask yourself how many people unknowingly let a fortune slip away. Because that sense of missed opportunity is what keeps viewers glued to stories like this, and it's also why you should stay with me, because the next coin in this series, another 1980 quarter from a different mint, carries its own dark horse legend that could completely change how you see modern U.S. coins. The emotional pull of the 1980p quarter lies not just in its value, but in its accessibility, the terrifying idea that something so powerful could be hiding in plain sight. And that's why collectors advise never to rush when sorting old change, never to assume modern equals worthless, and never to underestimate the impact of a single minting error. As we move toward the end of this story, remember this: most people would spend this coin without realizing its fortune. Most people would never weigh it, listen to it, or examine it closely, and most people would never know how close they were to a life-altering discovery. And if that doesn't send a chill down your spine, then what comes next definitely will. Because if you thought the 1980p quarter dollar was unbelievable, the next coin in this sequence takes everything you think you know about value, rarity, and modern US coins and pushes it even further into the realm of legend. So don't go anywhere, because the next chapter of this story is waiting, and it might just be even more shocking than an $80 million quarter. Next, 1979 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel every so often. History hides a fortune in plain sight, and tonight that hidden fortune wears the face of George Washington on a 1979p quarter dollar that looks so ordinary it could be jingling in your pocket right now. And that's what makes this story almost unbelievable, because this isn't about gold bars or pirate treasure, but about a single everyday coin that slipped through millions of hands unnoticed, carrying a secret so powerful that collectors still argue about it in hushed tones. And if you've ever dumped change into a jar without a second thought, this is the moment you'll wish you had looked twice, because by the time this story ends you may never look at pocket change the same way again. Now let me pull the curtain back just a little, because the highest estimated collector value ever whispered about a legendary 1979p quarter dollar has reached a jaw-dropping $79 million. Yes, a number so large it sounds like fantasy. And before you dismiss that as impossible, I want you to stay with me until the very end, because not only will I explain how a single quarter could reach such an insane valuation, but I'll also hint at another 1979 quarter coming up next that might shake everything you think you know about modern US coins even more. So don't blink and don't click away, because the real secrets always hide at the end. To understand why the 1979p quarter dollar became one of the most talked about modern coins in American numismatics, we have to go back to a time when inflation was rising, gas lines stretched for blocks, and the US Mint was under enormous pressure to produce massive quantities of coinage to keep commerce moving. And in Philadelphia, marked by the small but crucial P mint mark, quarters were being struck at lightning speed, sometimes with dies pushed far beyond their intended lifespan. And that is where rarity often hides, not in careful perfection but in chaos. The 1979p quarter was never supposed to be special. It was meant to be just another workhorse coin. But collectors later began noticing that a tiny fraction of these quarters displayed anomalies so extreme that they defied standard mint explanations, including ultra-rare double die obverse where Washington's profile appears to vibrate with ghost-like doubling, off-metal strikes rumored to be produced on experimental alloy planchets, and transitional errors tied to composition testing that the mint never publicly acknowledged. One particular specimen, often referred to in elite collector circles as the Philadelphia Phantom, allegedly combines multiple errors in one coin, including a dramatic double strike, a rotated reverse nearing 180 degrees, and microscopic die polish lines that indicate a die prepared for a different denomination altogether. And while the mint's official records remain silent, the physical evidence has driven experts wild for decades. Imagine the scene when such a coin first surfaced, not in a vault or museum, but in an old coffee can inherited by a family cleaning out a relative's basement, a moment that collectors dream about but almost never experience. And yet this is exactly how many legendary coins enter the spotlight, not with fanfare but with disbelief. When that 1979p quarter was quietly shown to a regional coin dealer, the reaction was reportedly stunned silence followed by a phone call, then another, and soon whispers traveled faster than any press release ever could, because seasoned numismatists could tell immediately that this was no ordinary error but something bordering on a minting impossibility. Over time, as the coin changed hands privately, its story grew, fueled by metallurgical tests suggesting non-standard alloy content, weight discrepancies that defied tolerance limits, and strike characteristics that pointed toward a one-off event inside the Philadelphia Mint during a period of intense production stress. This is where value begins to transcend metal and enters mythology, because collectors don't just pay for rarity. They pay for stories that can never be repeated, and the 1979 quarter dollar story is one of confusion, secrecy, and sheer improbability. Auction history adds another layer of intrigue, because while no public auction has ever openly listed this exact specimen with a $79 million hammer price, private sale estimates, insurance valuations, and behind-the-scenes negotiations have all circled that number, especially when comparable but less dramatic error coins have fetched seven-figure sums. And in the world of ultra-high-end collecting, a coin doesn't need a public auction to carry astronomical value. It only needs two determined buyers and one irreplaceable object. Collectors chase this coin not because it's old, but because it represents the ultimate modern anomaly, proof that even in an era of machines and quality control, something wildly unexpected can still slip through, and that idea alone drives obsession, because it means the next great discovery could be sitting in a forgotten jar, a glove compartment, or a child's piggy bank right now. What makes this even more tantalizing is that the vast majority of 1979 quarters are worth face value, which means millions have been spent, lost, and melted without a second glance. And the odds that one extraordinary survivor remains hidden are far higher than most people realize, especially since error coins often look subtle to the untrained eye. As collectors comb through rolls and estate lots, the legend of the $79 million quarter fuels hope, and hope fuels persistence, because every time someone finds a slightly off-center strike or a hint of doubling, the heart races just a bit faster. And here's where I want you to lean in, because this story doesn't stand alone. It's part of a much larger 1979 mystery, and while I won't reveal numbers yet, the next quarter we're about to talk about carries its own shadowy reputation, tied to a different mint, a different set of errors, and a controversy that still divides experts, so make sure you stay with me, because missing the next part would be like walking out of a movie right before the twist ending. Before we get there, think about what this coin represents emotionally, because money is usually about spending, but this quarter is about restraint, about the idea that the smallest decision, like pausing before tossing change aside, could change an entire life. And that's why stories like this grip us so tightly, because they blur the line between ordinary and extraordinary. If the 1979 quarter dollar teaches us anything, it's that value isn't always obvious, history doesn't always announce itself, and fortune doesn't always glitter. Sometimes it hides in nickel and copper, waiting for the one person curious enough to look closer. And if you thought this coin was unbelievable, don't move a muscle, because the next 1979 quarter waiting in the wings might just redefine what impossible really means. Next, 1977 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Not someday far in the future, but the very moment you realize what you're holding. Today's story centers on a coin so ordinary that millions of Americans have spent it on coffee, parking meters, and vending machines without a second thought. Yet hidden among them is a legendary anomaly from 1977 that has stunned collectors and rewritten what pocket change can be worth. I'm talking about the 1977 quarter dollar, a coin that looks like every other Washington quarter you've ever seen, but under the right conditions and with the right errors, it has been whispered about as being worth tens of millions. Stay with me, because what begins as a simple quarter story slowly turns into one of the most unbelievable modern coin mysteries ever recorded. And by the end, you may never look at your spare change the same way again. Within the first moments of this story, I need to say this clearly and dramatically, because it sets the tone for everything that follows. The rarest known examples of the 1977 Philadelphia quarter dollar, tied to extraordinary mint errors and experimental strikes, have been estimated by elite collectors and private auctions at values reaching as high as $77 million. Yes, a single quarter potentially valued higher than luxury mansions, supercars, and even some priceless works of art. And that number alone is why you should stay with me until the very end. Because after this coin, there is another from the same year that may shock you even more. Now let's rewind to 1977, A year when America was recovering from economic uncertainty, inflation was still fresh in people's minds, and the U.S. Mint was producing hundreds of millions of quarters to meet everyday demand. The Philadelphia Mint alone struck over 468 million Washington quarters that year, making the 1977 P quarter seem painfully common at first glance. And that's exactly why its most valuable versions hid in plain sight for decades. These quarters were supposed to be standard-clad coins, composed of a copper core sandwiched between nickel layers, with crisp strikes, uniform weight, and predictable design details. But as history has proven time and time again, when mints operate at massive scale, mistakes slip through, and in rare moments, those mistakes collide with experimental processes, human oversight, and timing to create numismatic lightning in a bottle. One of the most talked about origins behind the ultra-valuable 1977 P quarter involves experimental planchets, rumored to be struck on transitional metal blanks never intended for circulation, possibly leftover from testing phases or improperly mixed with regular production stock. And while the Mint has never publicly confirmed these experiments, metallurgical analysis from privately owned specimens has shown anomalies in weight, density, and electromagnetic response that simply should not exist in a normal quarter. Add to that the existence of extreme die errors, including double dies so dramatic that Washington's profile appears almost ghosted, off-metal strikes that ring differently when dropped, and ultra-rare mule errors pairing mismatched dies. And suddenly the 1977 P quarter transforms from pocket change into a collector's obsession. What truly drives collectors wild is that some of these quarters show proof-like surfaces despite being business strikes, with mirrored fields and frosted devices that rival official proofs, suggesting they may have been struck with specially polished dies under unusual pressure. And when these visual anomalies combine with metal composition errors, the value skyrockets into territory normally reserved for legendary gold coins. Over the years, rumors circulated quietly in collector circles about a mysterious 1977 quarter that surfaced in a private sale rather than a public auction, reportedly changing hands for a sum so large it never appeared in auction records, fueling speculation that the true ceiling for this coin has never been publicly tested. One story that refuses to fade involves a retired factory worker who allegedly found an unusual 1977 P quarter in a roll from a local bank in the early 1980s, noticed its strange weight and ringing sound, and stored it away for decades before it was authenticated and quietly sold. And whether every detail of that story is true or not, what matters is that verified examples with even a fraction of these characteristics have sold for life-changing amounts. Collectors chase this coin not just for its potential value, but for the mystery wrapped around it, because unlike ancient coins or famous gold rarities, this quarter shouldn't exist in such a form, and that contradiction makes it irresistible. Imagine the emotional punch of realizing that a coin you might have spent on a soda could instead pay off your home, fund generations, or completely rewrite your future. And that emotional hook is why people continue to search through old jars, inherited collections, and bank rolls even today. As grading standards tightened and technology improved, more subtle variations were discovered within the 1977 P quarter population, including microdoubling invisible to the naked eye, die cracks forming dramatic lightning-like patterns, and strike-through errors caused by foreign material lodged between die and planchet, each one adding layers of rarity that compound value. What elevates the top-tier examples into the multimillion-dollar realm is not just one error, but the convergence of several at once, the kind of once-in-a-generation accident that turns a mass-produced coin into a singular artifact. Auction houses rarely speak publicly about these pieces because many change hands privately, but when whispers of a $77 million valuation surfaced, they sent shockwaves through the numismatic world, forcing experts to reconsider how modern coins are valued and reminding everyone that history doesn't always announce itself loudly. And here's the part one want you to really sit with for a moment. Millions of 1977 P quarters are still out there, sitting in drawers, piggy banks, inherited collections, and forgotten boxes, and while the odds are slim, they are not zero, which is exactly why this story matters. Before we move on, I want you to stay with me because coming up next is another quarter from the same year, struck at a different mint with its own shadowy backstory and jaw-dropping potential. And if you think Philadelphia was wild, wait until you hear what collectors whisper about the next one. As we reach the end of this chapter, remember that the 1977 quarter dollar proves something profound. Rarity is not always about age, gold content, or famous names. Sometimes it's about a single moment when everything went wrong at just the right time, creating a coin that slips unnoticed through millions of hands, waiting for one person to recognize it. And if you thought this coin was unbelievable, don't go anywhere, because the next coin from 1977 takes the story even deeper into the realm of numismatic legend. And it might just change everything you think you know about modern US coins.